Welcome to the Whistleblower of the Week podcast, hosted by FBI whistleblower Jane Turner. Join her as she shares the stories of real life heroes and people of integrity.
Hello, this is Jane Turner with Whistleblower of the Week. And today we have an extremely interesting whistleblower, a heroic whistleblower, a whistleblower who came from Australia. His name is Abdel Badoura. And his story is so interesting, so fascinating, because it also has elements in it that reflect on our society. So, welcome, Abdel. I am so excited to have you on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Jane. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking to yourself today and trying to share my story so that, kind of people or the general public really understands what's driving cost of living up in the last couple of years.
Oh, it's just so fascinating. And it really fits into what's happening in the United States. But tell me, first of all, about your background. Tell me about your parents and where you were raised. And then we'll talk about your whistleblowing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents are originally from Jordan in the Middle East. We migrated to Australia in 1995, where we kind of lived. My dad and mom were working. We became citizens, and yeah, I kind of spent the majority of my adulthood there, doing university, working. But prior to that, I had a very, I guess, international upbringing experience. My dad was a software engineer. Back then, I guess that job was in high demand. So we lived in so many different countries, meeting people from different cultures, and it was great. I feel like it grounded me and it gave me different perspectives on life, which no doubt kind of aided my ability to kind of become a whistleblower and try to do the right thing. I think that experience and the not morale, the morals, I should say, that my parents
Mhm.
instilled in me were really high in the sense of integrity and honesty. I remember my dad, when I was young, he used to say, like, I hate lying. Lying is just silly because you're either eventually going to get caught out or,
Mhm.
you're not trying to take responsibility. And that kind of stuck with me my whole life. And even when I speak to my wife, or when we first met, I should say, I kind of told her, and I was like, hey, look, I personally hate lying, and I don't believe I'm capable of lying, mainly because we're all grown-ups and we make decisions, right? And we,
Mhm.
as grown-ups, know that every decision has a reward and a risk, and sometimes you get the reward, sometimes you get the risk, but
Mhm.
you just need to own up to it and be a grown up and move on, essentially.
That's excellent philosophy. And you fall right in that group of whistleblowers, integrity, honesty, you're right there with them. Now, this is a recent act of whistleblowing. You were in Australia when this happened.
Hmm.
And tell me what industry you were working in and what caused you to blow the whistle.
Yeah, so I have spent 15 years working in the consumer goods industry, on the supplier side, for manufacturers that sell products into supermarkets. So I've worked for large Fortune 100 companies like Reckitt, who do brands like Lysol and Durex,
Oh.
to startups, and myself starting my own little business, which I believe gave me a good rounded perspective on how the corporate world operates from a supermarket perspective, and allowed me to get a breadth of knowledge pretty quickly. And during that time, I saw a lot of things that really disheartened me about how corporations behave. Everything needs to have a dollar value attached
Mhm.
to it. You can't do a campaign for, say, the environment without making sure that the financials make sense and you're going to make a profit out of it. And to me, that just didn't make sense. If you want to do something good, do something good. Don't attach value to it. And, that then forces you to make the decision of whether you're doing it or not. Um,
So tell
Yeah,
me
so
about these suppliers you work for. I, and as well as many people listening, probably don't know how it works. I mean, we just go into a supermarket, buy our milk, buy our eggs. Well, not so much anymore, but we're going around the supermarket just complaining about the prices. But
mhm,
how does that get there? Can you kind of explain in simple terms how it gets from point A to point B or A,
yeah,
B, C?
yeah, absolutely. So you essentially have a company, let's say Reckitt's as an example, they have a whole bunch of brands globally. If they enter into a new market, let's say they've just come into Australia, they
Mhm.
would reach out to these big supermarkets and kind of give them a pitch or a sell saying, hey, we're Reckitt's, we have X amount of brands, this is what our plans are in Australia overall, this is how much money we want to invest. And then the supermarkets will make a decision based on ranging the product and getting on the shelf or turning the company away. What you usually find is companies like Reckitt's always get on the shelf because they're huge multinational companies with a lot of money. What you don't see is these innovative startup brands that don't have the capital to compete with the likes of Reckitt's getting into the supermarket because and I imagine supermarkets in the US are very similar.
Mhm.
They'll, with my own brand, I try to get into supermarkets in Australia, and one of the challenges that they would always say is, your brand's very, very small. Once you grow it, come back to us and we'll take it and we'll put it on the shelf. And for me, that doesn't make sense because if I've invested a lot of money to build a brand that now you guys want, why would I then give you a ton of money to get on the shelf after I've done all the hard work? And the mix in the equation essentially is not always equal between suppliers and supermarkets. But more importantly, these kind of smaller startup brands that are genuinely innovating never make it to mainstream, and some of them die along the way, essentially, just because they can't make it. Um,
Well, I'm a little confused here. Why do you have to pay the grocery store to display your products? Why aren't they just getting your products because they're making money off them when they sell them?
I guess the shelf space is limited, so you
Oh,
can't have a million products. The supermarkets will prioritize what makes them the most amount of money. But what
uh,
happens with that is you have suppliers that will pay extraordinary amount of money to keep competitors out. By say, I need 50% of the shelf, and this is the money I give you. So I guess what that cycle does is it makes the retailers dependent on those millions of dollars that they will not touch the shelf that they've allocated to you. Otherwise,
um,
the suppliers will then turn around and be like, hey, remember that 3 million I was giving you for the shelf? I'm now, because you messed with it, I'm now going to drop that to a million.
so that's not for the product, Abdel. They're paying for the shelf space?
Yeah. Pretty, that's,
Wow.
it's, yeah, think of it as like you're renting out the shelf
Yeah.
space. Yeah,
Yeah. And the suppliers have to pay for that shelf space.
that's correct. Yeah,
Wow. Even though they sell the stuff the suppliers provide and make a profit on it, you
that's
still
correct.
have to pay for shelf space.
Yep.
So they get two bangs for their buck.
They get more than two bangs, at least in
Okay.
Australia.
Okay. Tell
So
us about it.
in Australia, I guess step one is trying to get on the shelf, which comes with a payment. The second step is a promotional plan, which, it makes sense. You want to sell your products, you need to discount it to recruit customers. However, that promotional plan is dictated by the supermarkets onto the supplier based
Mm.
on what they say is category norms. And then once they pretty much give you your promotional plan, the depth, the frequency, they then ask you to contribute to their own media assets. So your POS material in stores, suppliers pay for that in Australia. The promotion supplier pays for that as well in Australia, along with the supplier's own media that then they go kind of pay to ABC or CBS and whatever it might be. So in my opening statement, I mentioned that supermarkets are running risk-free businesses.
Oh,
And in my
certainly are.
opinion, it really is, because they're not paying for anything. They're forcing suppliers to pay for a lot of the assets and promotions and everything, which then kind of begs the question: what's the risk that the supermarket's taking?
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right. Right. And we should mention that less than a year ago, you did testify in front of what would be known as a congressional special committee about this uh, that was taking place in Australia.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about when you testified.
Hmm.
But tell us how you started those first steps, what your job title was, and what made you decide to pull the pin on whistleblowing.
Yeah. So my job title at the time was National Account Manager for a retailer called Coles in Australia. They're the
Ah,
second largest retailer in Australia from a supermarket perspective.
right.
It really, so the cost of living crisis, I would say, everybody started feeling the pinch mid 2023 in Australia. Towards
Hmm.
the end of 2023, there were a lot of state inquiries open, and one of them was in the state of Victoria, where the government was looking at the pricing, why they've exponentially gone up, and what can they do to try to kind of bring it down to aid the population. And I remember reaching out to the Victoria government saying, "Hey, I work in the industry. I have 15 years of experience. What's currently happening shouldn't be happening, and I have some information to share, and I can provide extra context to aid your investigation." So we had an initial call. I would say it was December 2023. Um, from there, they connected me with a media company where, again, I was more of a consultant till a point where they said, "Hey, we need you to kind of come on. We need to have a person and a voice." At that time, with the protections afforded to whistleblowers, I couldn't kind of show my face or voice or
Uh,
anything. So I helped, but in an de-identified way. And it was kind of scary at the time, because I heard a lot of stories of media companies, especially this specific one in Australia, that had whistleblowers before that they kind of threw under the bus. And
oh,
specifically, it was David McBride, actually,
yeah.
the Defense Force whistleblower. So I was apprehensive, but I felt like I needed to say something.
Yeah.
Um, and then after I, did that part, there was no repercussions. I was kind of fortunate that nobody recognized me, and even today, I think if people recognize me, which I don't think they will, or it'll be very hard to prove, there could be potential legal consequences. But
Right.
I'm not too worried about that at this stage. Um, the kicker for me was, hearing many stories about my fellow citizens that their mortgage payments doubled overnight, that they're making decisions of prioritizing getting cat food over food for themselves. There were some university students that were dumpster diving in the supermarket's dumpsters for the food that they're throwing out to actually get some food. That for me was very disheartening. It just, I couldn't make sense of it. How can my neighbor potentially be doing something like this, and nobody's trying to help? The government's not doing anything about it, and these
Hmm.
supermarkets and suppliers are just reaping in huge profits. And it was probably February of 2024. I went to this retailer that I was managing. They had like an annual meeting, and one of their senior members of the team, came up and spoke about the topic of cost of living. Uh, and her take on the situation was, extremely, I think, disrespectful to the people struggling. She joked about it, mentioned that it's not really the supermarkets. The supermarkets get caught up in the news, but it's really the electricity companies and, the kind of mortgage and banks. We're fine. This is not an issue for us. We're not really going to do anything different. And, sitting there, hearing this
Wow.
and seeing kind of the rest of the management team's body language, it just felt wrong. And, yeah, it just really, really annoyed me, to be honest, that they couldn't, just for a second take a humanistic approach and be like, how can we allow for people to dumpster dive?
Right, right.
Um,
I have to tell you, I did read during that time that, Australians were just not buying fresh fruit, vegetables, eggs, milk because they couldn't afford it.
that's correct.
And, we always think, well, it's Australia and it takes so much to get there. Maybe it's the shipping. You just never put it in context, but you're putting it in context. It's not the distance from the rest of the world. It is the entities themselves, the corporations. And
That's
you
correct.
saw it up close and personal,
Hmm.
and it touched you.
Yeah.
So you decided then to do what?
So at that time, I was speaking with a senator's aide who was on the committee, providing again information from a consultative approach. When I heard that and saw that,
Mm.
coincidentally, the senator's aide made a request and said, you know, what you're providing is really, really important and it's information that everybody needs to know, but we need a face and a person.
Uh-oh.
She said that if you just submitted a written document, it's going to get lost. We had so many submissions. We really need an individual to step up, and nobody that we're speaking to is willing to step up. Is that something that you would entertain? And for me, it was an immediate absolutely.
Wow.
There's some wrong, well, not some. There's a lot of wrong being done, and I want to be
Wow.
part of the solution, not the problem. And I felt like I tried to make change within, through my conversations, both internally at a supplier perspective and with my dealings in the supermarket. But it was clear that the only thing that mattered was the financial reward. And yeah, that was, kind of when I made the decision to really come forward and provide the evidence that I had, to try to aid the government to bring down the cost of living crisis and hold the people responsible accountable.
Abdel, this just sounds like just a shot from above. Because I thought the same thing. If not me, who? If not now, when? And tell me about what kind of protections you have there in Australia. I mean, here they're asking you, we need a face, and nobody will come forward. This is common. And you said, okay, that will be me. What
Hmm.
kind of whistleblower protections does Australia give their whistleblowers?
Yeah, so the whistleblower protections in Australia in general are governed by the corporations legislation, and are enforced by the ACCC, which is, I think, the equivalent of the FTC here, or the SEC. It's Australian Competition, Anti-Competition Competitive Watchdog, essentially. And the protections essentially are where you have to raise concerns through the ACCC, but then the ACCC is a large organization that, if they don't have the mandate, they don't have the funds, things may never get done. How do they go ahead and investigate? They ask for really, really specific, kind of evidence, examples, and working with the ACCC, they essentially want you to deliver the case for them. If you can't deliver the case, signed, sealed, delivered, it's very difficult for them to then kind of take it further.
Mm.
But the unique nature of this inquiry is we have something called parliamentary privilege in Australia, where if you provide a testimony or evidence to a Senate Select Committee, everything you say in that room cannot be used against you in litigation post whatever you said. However, if you do kind of repeat the things you said in that room outside, there is risk of litigation because that parliamentary privilege expires outside those doors. So other people can say, pick up your stuff and talk about it, but you personally can, kind of direct people to where they can find information or speak in very generalistic terms. And the challenge, I would say, and this wasn't, this was more of a concern for me, and it's not, what's the word? It wasn't I guess, confirmed, but it was kind of a suspicion. In Australia, we don't truly have competition when it comes to the supermarket industry, nor banking and anything else, because we're, by land size, we're a huge country. Population, we're only 26, 27 million. So, we have two major supermarkets, we have four major banks, four major electricity companies, which allows them to really control the market and have no competition between each other. So, as an example, the two major retailers, Woolworths and Coles, have similar store numbers, same range, same pricing, same promotional plan, nothing really different between both of them except for their logos and names. And this can only happen if you don't truly have competition in the country, which then leads to this corruption and poor tactics that lead to the cost of living crisis increasing. Because what else are people going to do if there's no other retailers with the equivalent land mass, or kind of on every single corner? They can do whatever they want with the pricing. You're forced to buy it, and just maybe complain or try to control your purchasing a little bit. And from a legal consequence perspective, because they controlled so much power, one of my fears was that they would force the supplier I worked for to take legal action against me, because the NDA that I signed was with the supplier and not necessarily the retailer. So if any legal action was going to come, it would have come from my previous employer as opposed to the supermarkets themselves. But they do have that much power that they could coerce them into saying, hey, if you guys want to remain on the shelf and have business with us, kind of deal with this guy or silence him for us.
Wow. Wow. I noticed in your Senate testimony that one of the senators brought up the fact that AT&T in America got so big that they kind of controlled everything, but after they had divestiture, that it worked out much better, provided competition. Is that what he was talking about in terms of your supermarkets? I've heard about your banks.
Yeah.
Whistleblowers have talked about your banks. And these other corporate entities there, are they seriously going to go through with any of that?
So I guess the disappointing part for me, and maybe this was me managing my expectations a little bit better, I thought that there would be instant and immediate action from the government, that they would actually want to do something. The main thing that I kind of wanted to push for as a result of this is divestiture law. In Australia, we currently do not have that. And what happened after the inquiry and just pre to the inquiry, we had the prime minister come out and say, look, we can't break supermarkets up. We're not communist Russia, which is, a idiotic statement, to be honest. It's not what divestiture law is all about. So, it kind of got bad press, and then the media just ran with it. The second element, the government, because of the lack of competition, these companies are so big that they obviously give money to the government. But a lot of, we call our pension fund in Australia superannuation fund, which, you contribute to, employees contribute to. These companies that manage the super funds invest in the stock market, in the Australian stock market and the global one. And a lot of them have shares, or, the money's tied up in these big supermarkets because they're never going to fail. Every year they go higher. So the government was kind of in a hard spot to say, well, if we do divestiture, then this could impact overall pensions and create, something maybe that they didn't want to deal with. So, I guess they haven't done anything with what I provided so far. There has been a ACCC inquiry where the report was supposed to be delivered no later than the 25th of February this year to the government. The government has not released the report yet. I, post my whistleblowing, reached out to the Prime Minister, our economics minister, just with a letter explaining who I am, what I did, and why divestiture legislation was super, super critical for Australia and for the welfare of future generations. The Prime Minister's office responded saying, "Hey, this is for the economics minister. We forwarded your request there." The economics minister said that they've just made the Food and Grocery Council conduct review. It's Food and Grocery. What is it called now? Code, Food and Grocery Code. Sorry, there it is. Food and Grocery Code is now going to be mandatory, and it's laughable because the supermarkets wrote that code, and the supermarkets were already following it, and the supermarkets had no issue with it becoming mandatory because it gave no consumer protections in that. It didn't give suppliers true protections in that, and there was really nobody that suppliers can complain to about any violations from the supermarket because the ombudsperson that was in charge of it was employed by the supermarkets. So
oh boy,
you're kind of like, what do you do in a situation where a supermarket does wrong? So needless to say, his response was, irrelevant. But I have been told by the lawyer that represented me that what I did was huge and the information that I gave was huge, but governments are extremely slow, and it might be for another 5 years till you see something actually happen, which is disappointing. But I understand that the world works in the way that it does, and if we lived in a perfect world, we wouldn't be having these conversations.
Exactly.
And you got to give things time to kind of just play out, which that's all I can do in this stage. It does feel to a certain degree that the government lost an opportunity. They could have really struck when the iron was hot, but they've left it to this stage. And I'm not even sure if they're going to release this supermarket report that the ACCC was looking at.
The interview will continue after this brief message. Become part of the growing grassroots movement that supports whistleblowers around the world who risk their careers, financial security, friendships, and even their freedom to speak out against wrongdoing. Make a one-time gift or become a monthly donor today. Every donation makes a difference. Visit whistleblowersblog.org to give.
Did you get any media attention there in Australia? I noticed the UK gave you media attention. Did anyone in Australia give you any media attention?
Yeah, so my opening statement got published in The Guardian. All the major news networks picked up my testimony and kind of put it, showed certain elements of it. I did get a lot of requests to appear on, network news shows. At the time, I had, I guess, two conflicting priorities. One of them was I didn't want to make this about me. It's about these people that are having to dumpster dive, and I didn't want the story to turn into, oh, this, he's the whistleblower. We have the whistleblower. You guys have to tune in.
Yeah.
The second element was, on the advice of my lawyer, he said, you can obviously do these things, but the difficulty with live TV is you can't take things back. So he's like, the hard part is if you mention anything you mentioned in there, that opens you up to litigation. So he's like, I personally would not do it because of the risks, but he's like, it's up to you, and I'll still support you, and I'm your lawyer, but my recommendation is don't do it. That the request literally started as soon as I left the room, at the Senate hearing, and my lawyer was with me, and I was like, okay, look, on your advice, the reason I have a lawyer is to take, his or her advice, and I'm not going to be silly and not do that. So I'll decline all these, kind of media appearances and things.
Very smart. In fact, that's what I always tell whistleblowers is, if you don't have an attorney, get one, because it's a labyrinth to try to navigate whistleblowing law by yourself, or the costs, or the media blowback.
Yeah.
Can you dumb it down exactly what? Because can we follow a product from the suppliers to the supermarkets, and you can tell, or a series of products, and you can tell us exactly how this scam works?
Sure.
and I understand these suppliers are worldwide. I mean, they're supplying Australia with the same stuff we're getting here in the States.
Yeah.
These are massive
Hmm.
retailers, correct? Or
Absolutely.
suppliers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell us how this works in a simplistic way, how it works to get from point A to point B to point C, and where everybody's making money.
Gotcha. So
Okay.
let's say you got a product. Product A, you want to get
Mm-hmm.
it into a supermarket. In Australia, how it works is you first negotiate with the supermarket about getting your product on the shelf.
Right.
They hit you with a terms document, which means that you have to give them a discount on your list price every single day. And that's just the pleasure of doing business with them. You don't get anything in return besides, the kind of commitment that they'll range your product. But then in the same agreement, they have some really hard rules around performance. And if the performance doesn't mean that your product's out. So even if you had invested all this money in the beginning, performance doesn't mean you're out and you don't get your money back. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So
Okay.
first element, terms document. It's an everyday discount on the product. So you have an iPhone, costs $1,000. They
Yep.
say we want $200 off every single iPhone to get on our shelves. The supplier would be like, okay, I can do $200. Then you start speaking to the category teams. So categories are kind of aisles in a supermarket. So you have a laundry category that includes, detergents, stain removers, fabric softeners, etc. These categories are managed by one person usually, with an assistant, at least in Australia, and they then start dictating to you what their profitability and margins need to be at for you to get on the shelf. So in Australia, the industries or categories that I worked in, all the margins were plus 50%.
Plus 50. So
Plus
that
50%.
okay, so let's follow the iPhone. So the distributor says, here's $1,000 iPhone. So the supermarket makes them sign a contract that says that uh, they'll take this discount.
Mm-hmm.
So how much would they say to the iPhone retailer? How much would they say, wait a second, this is our gravy, this is our VIG? How much would they say? 50%?
So 50% is the profit that the supermarket wants to make from selling the iPhone.
Okay, so the iPhone's $1,000.
So the iPhone's $1,000. The supermarket is expecting to make at least $500 from the sale.
You're kidding.
No,
So they list the iPhone for $1,500?
that's one way of doing it. Yep.
Wow.
And I guess one important thing to mention at this point is in Australia, and I'm not sure if this works the same way here. The price is at the discretion of the retailer. So from a supplier perspective, you give them a recommended retail price. You say, hey, we believe our product's going to be priced at $1,000. They can then turn around and be like, that's cool. We want to charge $2,000 for it. And generally, you can't not generally, legally, you can't do anything about it because retail is set by the supermarket, not by the supplier. So you can't force a price onto the supermarket. That would be illegal in Australia. So whatever they want to sell it at, that's their business, and suppliers can't get involved.
Wow. That's frightening.
Yeah.
So the supermarkets, now I'm going to assume that they may be in, I hate to use the word collusion, but the two supermarkets might be talking to each other on how to price those iPhones. So if you go into one and it's $1,500, you'll go in the other one and it's also $1,500. So
Correct.
you're going to have to pay $1,500 for that iPhone because there's no competition.
Exactly. That's 100% how it works.
And how do
But
the supermarkets determine, okay, our buyers, this is how much we can squeeze out of them? How do
yeah,
they know that if they price it at 15, they'll still buy it?
so there's a lot of data in that world. Your loyalty cards that you have, that's
Hmm.
data that they capture that they then on-sell to suppliers, that suppliers use to make decisions on products to come out and that kind of stuff. But also you have pricing decisions on there where you can see what's kind of the sweet spot to sell a product at. Where if you kind of go over a cliff, people are not going to buy it. You're going to lose a lot of market share. But if you stick in between, this margin here, you're okay.
And who puts that data out?
So it's the supermarket data, but then they
Oh,
contract
gotcha.
it out to these two companies. One is called IRI, and the other one's called Nielsen, and they're just kind of data companies that take
Sure.
all that information and put it in a format that suppliers can use, mainly Excel, and they create these little
Ah,
dashboards that you can start looking at market share, price, how many units you sold, what was your overall dollars, and other elements that are relevant to the industry.
so Abdel, they're figuring out how much they can squeeze from you.
Hmm.
It doesn't have anything to do with anything except how much they can squeeze out of you.
Correct.
Wow, that's a frightening system to be in.
And what makes it even more frightening, Jane, is they never, in my experience, say the margin we want to make off this product is X amount of dollars. It's always a percentage that they try to increase year on year. So, as an example, if you're already a supplier inside the supermarkets, you generally yearly have to do something they call a range review, where you get to present your new product that you want to get on the shelf, maybe delete some products that are not performing from your own perspective, and it's normal business stuff. But what they do in that is they'll turn around and be like, hey, your product, the overall category margin is, maybe 47%. So our category margin right now is 49. So you're actually not good for my business. And I need you to come up to 49. Otherwise, I'm going to have to make some decisions because, the numbers don't add up to me. So they link you to a percentage that they try to increase year on year. What makes it really, really bad when it comes to these price increases that come through, if their profitability is linked to a percentage, that means if they're charging more money, they make more money. So for me, there's a conflict of interest right there, if you think
Hmm.
about it, right? So if I'm going to make more money by accepting this price increase, I have zero motivation to not accept it.
Right. Wow, that's almost Machiavellian, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So let me ask you this. So we ran into a product. We were over in England here last
Hmm.
year. It's funny. I was talking to Georgina Hall with Whistleblowers UK, and we happened to find a product in a store that we really liked. So we liked it so much, and it's not here in the States, that we bought a bunch and brought it back and then ran out. And so we thought, oh man, next time we go back, we'll have to get some more. But all of a sudden, here, just this month, it appeared on the shelves of Target.
Hmm.
So here's a product from the UK, ends up on our shelves. By what you're saying, Abdel, it sounds like, did they have to pay premium to come over here into the United States and get shelf space that ended up on Target? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
they,
that's exactly, yeah.
so is that kind of a bribe?
The way that they it's the way that I would describe supermarkets and even suppliers is that they are so big and it's such a well-oiled machine that I guess different phrases or terms might be used, which you could be like, that's just a payment to get on the shelf. Like it's a bribe.
Yeah.
But they would just be like, no, 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 no. It's not a bribe. We want you to give us this payment that will be allocated towards this advertising, right? So remember the stuff that
Oh,
I spoke about, their own
yes.
advertising. So just to give you an example of how ridiculous their charges are,
Yeah.
we have just normal paper catalogs in Australia. I assume you guys have some here too,
Yep.
and you get like maybe a picture this big of your product and price.
Mhm.
That's it. One retailer, Woolworths, charges $24,000 per week for just one spot.
That little picture,
That little
little,
picture.
yeah, description.
$24,000. Now, if
Wow.
you if you think about how many products are in this catalog,
Oh,
it's like a
tons.
30-page catalog,
Yeah, tons.
24,000 a pop. And then the bigger half page and full page are even more expensive. So when you tally it up, and I believe I tallied it up in the Senate inquiry, it was around $4.3 million per week that they make from catalogs. I'm not a catalog expert in terms of printing and distributing, but I'm almost 100% sure it does not take $4.3 million to
No,
print this thing and distribute it, especially for
right,
companies that big that have economies of scale that they can go negotiate and get a
right.
really, really great deal. So I guess it's, the term is not a bribe, but if you look at it, there's no ROI. That, I can't
Yeah,
justify spending $24,000 on this little thing per 1 week.
right,
But
right.
suppliers understand, and they're like, that's what we have to do to get in, and that's the cost of doing business. So,
Yep.
we might call it a bribe or an under the table shady deal. They
Wow.
just refer to it as advertising money.
Wow. When I was working organized crime in New York, it's just the cost of doing business, the cost of doing
Hmm.
business. But it's a bribe.
Hmm.
So it's not the grocery store paying for that advertisement.
No,
It's the product maker. That's
that's
what
right.
blows me away.
Yep. Yep.
$24,000 they have to pay for that little ad in the little magazine, and and they just do it.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Let me ask you this: how is it that you, after all these years, are the only one brave enough to step forward and reveal what's going on behind the curtains?
Yeah. That's a great question, Jane. I contemplate this all the time, to be honest, because after I blew the whistle. There
Mhm.
were repercussions that kind of followed from there.
Mhm.
And, the one thing that I never understood was I get why the supermarkets would hate me. I get it.
Mhm.
But from a supplier standpoint, everything that I had said, I've heard conversations of suppliers complaining about it, being like, this is not right. This is BS, all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And, you know, I got zero support from the supplier world, which, it is what it is. Like I wasn't doing it to get their support.
Right.
Um, but the, to answer the question, the only thing that I could think about is, maybe people's personal circumstances are different to mine. I guess when I did this, I was fortunate enough to, not be, I don't have kids at the moment.
Mhm.
I don't have a mortgage. So I don't know if it was because I was in a position where I could do this and not lose a lot um,
Mhm.
financially that maybe allowed me or stopped other people from doing it.
Mhm.
But I think about all that, that question all the time. Why
Mhm.
did nobody else kind of
Mhm.
say anything, even if it was from an anonymous perspective, after I came forward that either validated, I don't think it needed validation personally, but, it kind of supported. And I honestly don't know. Maybe people's moral compass is different. Maybe
Yep. Yep.
they don't think about the bigger picture. They are just kind of head down. Hey, I just got to focus
Mhm.
on my job. I don't really want to think about the other fringe issues in society.
Right.
Um, that's yeah, it's a hard one to answer, and I truthfully don't know.
It could be because you're a hero and a person of integrity and conscience. Has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Good.
I've always thought that I've had not a kind of better moral compass than other people,
Mhm.
but for me, what's really important in life is who you are as an individual, your
Mhm.
integrity. Everything else, after that, it's your health, and then everything else doesn't really matter. Like money comes and goes. You get a job, you make a lot
That's
of
right.
money. You lose that job, you make a little bit less. Who cares? You have a house, you downsize, you upgrade.
Yeah.
Nothing really changes essentially. But if your integrity changes, I think you
Mhm.
lose yourself and your identity.
Yep.
And for me, that's I guess, a non-negotiable. Like have high standards of myself that even sometimes when I really want to do it,
Mm.
I tell myself that I can't do it. Silly example like speeding. You know, I know everybody speeds. It's a couple of miles over. What are you going to do? Like, it's not going to really hurt
Mm.
anything until one day it does.
Mm-hmm.
And, somebody dies.
Mm.
That's maybe what you did as an individual. And for me, the kind of consequences mentally of something like that, I know that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to live with myself. Because I was, rushing to get home.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, something really bad happened that, ended
Yep.
in somebody else's life being taken. Yeah, that's just kind
Hard to
of,
live with. Yeah, hard
yeah,
to live with.
yeah,
So let's talk about, you're no longer in Australia. Do you want to talk about where you're at and what you're doing? Specifically, I'm interested in your education. And I do hope I mentioned this to you earlier off camera, but I do hope you make it to National Whistleblower Day because you'll meet a room full of heroes just like you. And it's really super, gratifying to
yeah.
see the same people who think like you and have that same high integrity and conscience. It's really validating. But tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah. So now I'm located in Denver, Colorado. Um, it was always, I guess, part of the plan to relocate to Denver. My wife is from Denver. Her family's here. Her support network's here, and we want to we want to start a family soon. And part of that, she wanted to be close to her family.
Hmm.
Um, for me, I love the U.S. I've been here. I've traveled. I've visited. Um, and it was a no-brainer because
Yeah.
she's the one that's gonna have to carry the baby. Things are gonna change in her body, her hormone. Like,
That's
if
right.
all I have to do is move to another cool country, I think I can do that.
Yeah,
So
good for you. And she supported you, which is important.
she did, she
She
did.
supported you during the whistleblower trials and tribulations that you went
Hmm.
through, and that's critically important.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, that's
Um,
critically important.
but now after being a whistleblower, I decided to go back to school. I'm doing a Juris Doctor at the moment. Hopefully, I would, be in a position to graduate in 2 years' time, 2027. And I really want to dedicate my career to helping whistleblowers and advocating for human rights, whether it be here, Australia, globally. I think I think human rights are important, but also I think whistleblowing should be categorized as a human right. What a lot of people see of whistleblowers or kind of the common misconceptions like, oh, these people just, kind of hated their jobs or they were not that good or they were disenfranchised by the company. And it's not that at all. It's
No.
people who genuinely saw wrong and
Hmm.
felt compelled to speak out to make the system better. I don't think any whistleblower has ever gone into it thinking, hey, this is going to be
Yeah.
great for me and my
No.
life and my career. Like, I'm doing this for personal gain.
Yeah.
Never, right?
No.
So
Never.
I feel like whistleblowers deserve protection. I don't think it should cost you an arm and a leg
Oh,
to do the right thing either. And I appreciate and understand lawyers study a lot and, are very experienced and, want to charge what they believe they deserve. But I think there needs to be more organizations like the Human Rights Law Center that helped
yes.
me in Australia. They work pro bono. The lawyer that I
Wow.
had was one of the top whistleblower attorneys in Australia, Kieran Pender. Quick shout out to him. He's
Yes.
been awesome. And yeah, I guess that's what I'm doing right now and what I'd love to do in the future.
Do you see yourself staying in the United States? I'd like to check back with you in a couple of years and see what you're doing. You'd be perfect for the National Whistleblower Center. Holy buckets. Do you see staying here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for now, this is where my life is, and where we want to have our family. Um, I think Australia will always be home.
Yeah.
I love the city of Sydney. Every time I think about it, I smile, and to me, it's not saying like it's the best place on earth. I think it's different for everybody, right? But for
Mm-hmm.
me, you have the beach, you have a beautiful city,
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
mountains real close, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
gives you an aspect of you can do whatever you want in Sydney. There's always something. Public transport's good, so I definitely miss Sydney, and I think in the future we will go back to Australia. But this is definitely home now, and yeah, loving being here. It's been very very cool. People are very friendly, very welcoming. Yeah,
Well, I really appreciate you appearing on Whistleblower of the Week. And do you have any last words or thoughts to us? You've paid a high price. Your attitude is just superlative, but you have paid a price. And so, do you have any last words for whistleblowers or anything else? Because you're obviously a very intelligent person.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would say if anybody out there is thinking of blowing the whistle on corruption or something that they really, really feel strongly about, definitely do it, I would say, but be aware of the consequences and the risks. Uh, Having a lawyer, a good lawyer at the time, you might be like, well, the investment of money is tough.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recommend it higher than getting at least the advice. And maybe if it's not the right time to do it now, you wait or you get yourself in a position in 3 to 6 months to do it
Right.
because the repercussions are real, truthfully. Getting a job in either the same industry or another industry is very difficult. And, I've had issues with trying to find employment. Um, Things that people kind of don't tell you, or a lot of people just assume it's legal aspects. You lose
Mm-hmm.
friends for no reason.
Oh, yeah.
I've had people that just kind of dropped out, don't call me anymore. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who I was the godfather for a child just completely stopped, which is sad. But at the end of the day, everybody's different. Their situations are different. The way that they think about things is different. So, I recommend it. I would do it again in a heartbeat if I had to, or if I could go back and, would I do it? Yeah, 100%. Um, but I think it's just know the consequences, have a good support network, and when you're alone at night and that little voice starts playing in your head,
Mm-hmm.
just shut it off.
Abdel Badoura, you are a hero, a person of true conscience and integrity. It has been a joy to have you on this program. We'll be checking back with you, don't worry, because I'm very anxious to see where you're headed in life, and I think big things are in store for you.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so
that. Thank
much
you.
for coming on
Thank you,
our
Jane.
program. You
Thank you
bet.
for having me. I appreciate
You
it.
bet. It was a pleasure. And please, our listening audience, if you want to continue having whistleblowers in your life and being able to hear their stories, please contribute to the National Whistleblower Center. Just go ahead and look them up, National Whistleblower Center, send them a few dollars, and they'll be grateful. Thank you again, Abdel. You are magnificent.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. You can find more whistleblower stories at whistleblowersblog.org. Music by Rachel Kilgore, guest booking by Victoria Thompson, and editing by Anissa Cheek. Whistleblower of the Week is a production of Whistleblower Network News. The views expressed by podcast guests are their own and not those of Whistleblower Network News.